Dr. Charles Jacobs is our guest here at 1590 WCGO. He's the president of Americans for Peace and Tolerance, and we are a peaceful and tolerant nation. I'd like to learn more about Americans for Peace and Tolerance. We all want to become more peaceful and tolerant. I want the people who want us dead to be more peaceful and tolerant. And Dr. Charles Jacobs is going to fill us in with the latest on prospects in Boston and the Obama administration and their upcoming national conference. Tell us more, Dr. Jacobs.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Well, as many people know, on February 18th, President Obama is going to be holding a summit on countering violent extremism. Mm-hmm. And as we also know, even his most zealous supporters are chafing and chiding him for not identifying the threat as radical Islam, which it is. Even Thomas Friedman of the New York Times shocked everybody when he kind of ridiculed Obama's reticence to say those words. And you have John Kerry now being pressed, even on CNN, because I think the people are getting it, even on CNN, that, why won't you say this, that when people kill you screaming Allah Akbar, and they explained very carefully that they got the notion from the Quran, why won't you say at least that they're misunderstanders of one of the world's great religions, and that there is an ideology that's called radical Islam that is motivating them? But instead, you have the Obama administration treating jihad acts like street crimes. And that's what got them in trouble in Boston, because one of the three cities that the administration is naming as models for how to combat violent extremism is Boston, and yet Boston is exactly not that. Boston is a place where we just had the marathon bombing. Boston is a place where there is now a full network, a flow of radical Islamists, precisely because the leadership in Boston did not want to look the danger in the eye and call it for what it was. So in Boston, the Islamic Society of Boston is the institution that the Obama administration is encouraging law enforcement to work with to battle extremism, but that's a problem because they're extremists. They were set up here in the 1980s by a man named Al-Amoudi, who turned out to be an Al-Qaeda fundraiser, even though he fooled everybody and even was invited to the Bush and Clinton White Houses and accepted as a moderate. The Islamic Society of Boston built the largest mosque with Saudi money on the East Coast, bigger even than the one in Manhattan, millions and millions of Saudi dollars. And a trustee of the mosque is the head of the spiritual head of the Muslim Brotherhood, Yusuf Qaradawi. And when Boston officials said, gee, how did that happen? The Islamic Society of Boston told them, well, it was a clerical error that his name was on the papers for 6 or 7 years. But they turned a blind eye, and they're turning a blind eye because they don't want to be called Islamophobes or racists, or they can't see the Muslim community as any different than any other immigrant community that is unjustifiably marginalized and stressed, and so they want to be good. So the mayor of Boston, the very famous Thomas Menino, who just passed away, gave them practically for a couple of $100,000 a piece of land to build this mosque that was city land worth more than a couple of $1 million. And now there are 12 people connected to that mosque and the group that runs it, who are either in jail, dead, or on the lam from federal authorities, all connected to Islamist terrorists. You had a man here who was arrested because he was plotting to machine gun a shopping mall, just like they did in Paris, the kosher butcher. You had a man here who was raising money for the Pakistani group that did the Mumbai massacre. You had a man here, young man here, Ahmed Abu Samra, who was trained at Northeastern in computer skills and is now in Syria running ISIS's social media campaigns. And then you had the two bombers. So Boston is not, as President Obama says, a model. On the contrary, it's a cautionary tale.
Where else? This is a problem. I don't. There's got to be some sort of, Dr. Jacobs. What is your specialty? Because I'm very interested if you know anything about disorders. I think I'm suffering from some sort of Obama-related disorder, because I increasingly, I guess, as one might speak of someone who had a post-trauma disorder or after a car accident. I remember I had a very close friend who would sort of glaze over and not take anything seriously. I don't take anything the president does seriously anymore. I feel as if he has executive power. He seemed to have missed the last election. He doesn't listen to anybody around him. He seems to completely ignore his own staffers half the time, which I know some of the people in his White House are very smart. He makes these stunning mistakes, such as the error in Paris. He issues orders that have nothing to do with reality, such as this bizarre, repeated unwillingness to talk about Islamic extremism. I can't imagine a 1939 to 1945 scenario in which we were not permitted to use the word Nazi at the White House. But this is the world in which we live, Dr. Jacobs. Am I crazy? I cannot wrap my head around this outlandish, out of touch president. I just can't do it. Is it me?
I think there are a lot of people scratching their heads on a lot of this. We could name 25 things that seem strange, or incompetent, or who knows what. I mean, it was Menendez, Senator Menendez, said, sounds like when he listens to Obama, he's listening to talking points made in Tehran. So it is kind of strange. But, of all the theories, my favorite, I don't think he's a Muslim, and I don't think he's incompetent much.
Okay, well, I'm just curious, because you brought it up. Why don't you think he's a Muslim? He's educated at a madrasa. His patrimony is Muslim. His name is Barack Hussein Obama. Why isn't he a Muslim? He evidently distanced himself from Reverend Jeremiah Wright, the Christian pastor who he said was his spiritual father, yet whom he evidently did not know. I'm not saying he is a Muslim. I just don't see any evidence to say he's not. I understand.
I think he's an Islamophile. I think he likes the Muslim world and part of its culture. As you said, he grew up very young. He was there. I think he's more like a left-wing professor who is totally steeped in what scholars call postmodernism and what we common folks call political correctness. And I think he believes in the axioms of political correctness, which, by the way, all of our children are now steeped in unless you homeschool them. Right. We could name 5 or 6 of these principles. The West is not so good, particularly the United States. We stole the land from the Indians. We had black slaves. The problem in the world is that the powerful have too much power and the weak don't have enough. And so to make peace, you kind of have to reduce the powerful and empower the weak. We live on undeserved wealth, et cetera, et cetera. There's no real reason for human conflict that a conversation over a Starbucks
right, it's
coffee
a secular humanist relativism, disbelief in creation and supremacy and the disbelief
and it's because the power of that, which has spread far and wide, much further than most parents believe. They should just talk to their children. That the young generation believes that the other is always right? The other is better, and we're somehow guilty of who we are.
So, Dr. Jacobs, I'd like to have you on again. You fooled me with your Americans for Peace and Tolerance. I'm not so sure you're peaceful and tolerant. You might be a hateful right-winger. We'll have to check you out. But in the meantime, Dr. Jacobs, one last question. Am I crazy?
No, you're normal.
Okay. Dr. Charles Jacobs is president of Americans for Peace and Tolerance. It's loosely affiliated with Americans for Apple Pie and Justice. www.peaceandtolerance.org. We'll get to the bottom of this with my new friend.